Welcome to another Watercolours with Caroline. Today we're going to paint very loose, very wet in wet, based on a lovely photograph of Consecon Creek in Ontario by Lorraine Mackey. And we're going to use some pink, beautiful permanent rose and some bright greens and just really let the paint move how it wants to, wet in wet. So get quite a big piece of paper ready and a nice big brush so that you can get that paint moving, and let's get painting. So this is going to be what we are attempting to do today. And you definitely don't have to try and make yours look exactly like mine. That's kind of not the idea for an abstract. It's to make something look very wet in wet and something you love. Now, the two photos that I kind of combined were by the same person, and they were both of Consecon Creek in Ontario. And I loved the pinks in this one, and I loved the sort of the water lilies and the look of the lake in this one. And I liked when my printer kind of made the pink here with the what is really like a green gold. So we're going to start by getting some cheaper paper, if you like, whatever paper you like. I'm going to use a couple of my cheaper books, and we're going to, and I'll show you, this is in my cheap paper book, and this is the one I did when I was trying to work out of what colors to use. And I really recommend that you do that if you want to do a painting, is you get a little cheap watercolor book or pad or something, and you actually just play with the colors that you think you might use in your painting before you even start. That's where you've had some practice and you've kind of figured out what's going to happen and what you like. And then I just as a warm-up the other day in my even cheaper paper, I just was playing with my paint and my brush. So what we're trying to do is kind of play with your paints and your brushes, and you need a certain amount of colors. Before we get started, I just want to show you what the colors look like if you don't have them. So let's find a page here. We were just talking about green gold. So this, I'm just going to make a swatch of green gold. This color here is green gold. This is by Core Paints, QOR, Golden Paints. And I just think it's the most glorious color, this sort of goldish green. Now we're going to try and make something similar by using the Azo Yellow. So get some Azo Yellow, or your bright yellow, cadmium yellow, Hansa yellow, and a little bit of Prussian Blue. So this is a color that we're definitely going to use and make that bright green. We're going to use that green in our painting, and I'm going to paint that next to the green gold. So you can see, even though it's a very bright green, it doesn't have the intensity that the green gold has. But I haven't used the green gold in my painting. I'm just kind of showing you paints that are available if you want them. I'm going to first swatch you the Quinacridone Gold. So this is Quinacridone Gold. Again, a very beautiful color. And I'm going to try that with the Prussian as well, see what I get. So the Prussian's a very cool blue. So I'm going to get a bit of a darker green. So you can see this is green gold. This is the yellow and Prussian mix. This is Quinacridone Gold, and then this Quinacridone Prussian mix. So that's why green gold is such a gorgeous one to have. You can't mix it. It just doesn't happen. But you can, if you don't have a Quin Gold, you could mix raw sienna, or let's put raw sienna here, and then I'll put yellow ochre here. They're very similar, very similar earth colors, and I will mix each one with a little bit of yellow to see if I can get something goldish. So let's try the raw sienna with a bit of yellow. And try a little bit more of raw sienna with it. And then the yellow ochre. A bit of yellow. It's adding a bit more paint. So you get something close if you play with it. I'm going to add a bit more raw sienna to the mix so it's a bit more intense. That's not, you know, it's not bad. It's not as clear and transparent and beautiful as the Quinacridone Gold, but you've got something close. Or you can just use yellow in these paintings. That's fine. You don't have to have the Quinacridone Gold. But if you're looking to go to an art store and pick up some gorgeous, gorgeous colors, here's the Quinacridone Gold and here is the green gold, and they are transparent, they are light fast, they are intense, and they're very, very beautiful. I don't use them very often because I know that most people don't have them. So what you are going to start off with is just, I'm going to move my good one out the way, just getting used to being loose with your paints. So find a piece of paper that you can work on. I'll use this one here. And when we do our composition, the only thing you really need to put in to start is a horizon line. And I usually use a ruler. I'm being a bit, at least for a horizon line, I try and have it straight about 1/3 of the way up. So about, on mine, that was about 2 3/4 inches on my piece of paper here. I want it, I've kept it really light. I don't want my horizon line too low down because I want a lot of detail happening in the creek and in the sky, but I don't want it halfway because that's not good for a composition. And the sky is going to have more detail in, or more wet in wet, than the creek. So just a little bit extra space for the sky and a little less for the creek, but not, you know, not a real low horizon. So this is my piece of practice paper. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit, or maybe too much. No, that's okay. You can probably see well. And let's mix some colors and get them ready because we're going to work quite fast, wet in wet. And this is your practice. Remember, you don't have to get too worried about it because we're just going to loosen up. I'm going to make some room. You need some bright yellow, just ready to go. Let's get my bigger brush for mixing. So I'm going to use my Azo Yellow because it's lovely and bright. I'm going to have that just all ready to go. I do want to use some of my Quin Gold because it's so beautiful, and I'm going to put that here just wet enough that it will blend nicely on the paper. I'm going to have my Quinacridone Rose, and you can either use it just the way it comes out of the, you know, tube or out of your palette, or if you have a Quinacridone Gold, I've got another little spot, you can mix a little bit of Quinacridone Gold with it to make it more vibrant if you want. So those are some of the colors we're going to start with. And we're also going to mix into the sky some Prussian Blue. So I want to have some Prussian Blue ready. I'll have those all, start mixing those up. And we want that, the other thing we want is that bright, bright green. So I need another space. Let's get another space on my. So we get that bright, bright green by mixing the bright yellow, whatever bright yellow you have, really bright, Azo, Hansa, cadmium. and a little tiny bit of Prussian blue with it. So you get a really acid, bright green. Now, I'm just going to test it here. And don't forget to have a test strip too. See, it's a really, really, really bright acid green. If it becomes too green, add more yellow back into your mix. And at any time with this is not like when we're doing the ones with the wash where I say don't go back, don't add water. We're going to do the complete opposite. We're going to add water, we're going to go back, we're going to sort of play with what you can do with your paint when you're a bit loose. So I'm going to use quite a big brush because it keeps you really loose if you're working with a big brush. And you can work on dry paper, but you can also wet the paper as you go if you find your paint's not blending. But try and keep your paint nice and wet so you can make it blend on your paper. So we're going to have the yellow for the background trees and the lily pads. And then we're going to wet the yellow after we put it on. So I've got my yellow ready in front of me. And I want a big brush, and I want to be nice and loose. And I want to sort of go side to side because it's water. And then I'm going to have trees coming up here at the edge of this creek. So even though it's abstract, you're still thinking about your composition and your shapes, but you're just keeping them quite loose and open. And back and forth with my yellow here. And then I'm going to get some water on my brush. And I'm actually just going to put a little bit of water next to some of that yellow so that it's going to flow when I do the next layer of rose. And I'd like to wait for you to catch up, but at this point, when we're working wet and wet, it's impossible to stop and wait because it needs to be blending wet and wet. So I'm grabbing my rose and gold mix, and I want that to blend into my yellow. Like, see here, it's blending wet and wet. And I want it to come up into the sky and also down into the lake. So I'm going to streak it into that yellow down in the lake. And this is, remember, this is your practice one. So you can be as loose as you want. And again, take your water on your brush. You're not worried about backgrounds at this point, and put some water in to the rose to make sure it's wet and it's going to blend. You can have backgrounds. And at this point, I'm going to take my Quinacridone Gold. I'm going to make sure I've got enough of it on my brush. And I would like to take it along the shore here on this side. And anywhere I just feel like putting some gold, can be reflecting in the water. I can have, if I get a little bit more paint on my brush, it kind of floods up into what I've got here. And I want to get my Prussian Blue before my rose dries. Before the rose is dry, I want to make sure I get some blue on the sky and get that in so that it mixes with the rose before the rose starts to dry. And you'll see if the rose is still wet in places, you will get some bleed happening with your blue and your rose. Also, I want some Prussian Blue in the little bit in the water. And I'm also going to have some Ultramarine Blue in the water as well. Now, another thing you can do with this wet in wet mix is you can grab a soft dry brush, any kind of soft dry brush, and you can just help it mix if you want to by just pulling with your soft dry brush either up or down, or I figured down is a little better because you get more of a rain look. And if you want reflections in your water with your soft dry brush, you can just gently pull like this, and it kind of gives you that reflective look. Up here, because this is cheap paper, I have dry area mixing with wet area. That won't happen as much on a cotton paper, but if it does, because we're doing wet in wet, you can actually encourage water blooms with this method by going back in with some water. You'll get some blooms happening, but we are going for that look. Also, if you wanted to, you could go in, I've got some rose here, you could go in with some rose and get some deeper purple in the top of the sky. This is where you play this on your, right now we're not doing the actual picture, so play with what you can do with your paint. So I've gone back in with my number 10 brush with some rose here. I've not diluted it very much, it's quite strong. And while this water is still wet, I might want to put a little bit more strong rose in. This is my play one. I just want to see what's going to happen if I do that. I don't want too much in the sky, but I think it would look nice in the water. I've left some white showing because I've got other colors to put in. I have the greens and the dark greens and the ultramarines, all kinds of other colors that we'll put in. And when we do it for real, all the other colors will go on when this is dry. This will have to be dry. But what will happen is that really bright green that we made with the Prussian and the yellow is going to go in over the top of the yellow. And I can probably do it wet in wet on this paper to make more of a sort of a shrubbery look here and a bit more green in the water. Now, quite often you can try and do a bit of this wet on wet, but the danger is getting very muddy colors, because if you put too much green or blue in with the lovely pinks and yellows, you're going to end up getting browns and grays and muddy colors. And that is why when we do the painting at this point, we're going to have to stop and dry the first layer to make sure that when we put our second layer on, we get crisp, clean colors, not the pink and the green and the blue all mixing to make kind of a muddy color. So just you know, play with your paints. Just keep like putting them on and seeing what happens, and see at which point, as this is your practice, see at which point you start to get mud and you know that you have to stop and wait for it to dry. Because this is cheap paper, it dries quite quickly. So I'm going to move on and just try and see how much more I can get on there before I get mud. I want to make a nice deep dark green with the Prussian blue, the gold and the burnt sienna. So don't worry about making it now. I just want to show you what that will look like when we get there. My Prussian, I got a really deep green, and when this is dry, I will be able to come in with some deep green here, because this area of the lake is much darker. And also if I put a line of this along here, I will probably get some darker things happening here. Who knows what we'll get? That's what this this playing with the paint is all about. Getting quite dry over here, so put a bit more there. And it's good to have a big brush so that you don't get little tiny marks. Like here is a bit tiny. I'm going to take a wet brush and just get rid of that teeny tiny mark I made and make it a little bit bigger and more abstract. Now, it is abstract, but we're also trying to represent a scene. But when you come to do the leaves and everything, it pulls it all together and makes it look like something. Another color I have in the lake is the Ultramarine Blue for the darker parts of the lake. Just going to get some of that. They're sort of in the shadows here. And again, if I put that over the pink, I'm going to get a nice sort of a lilac-y color. But it is getting a little bit wet for me to do much more work. What you lose if you go in with too much wet in wet, you lose the freshness that you have in your painting. You lose all this kind of fresh look that I have up here. I've left it alone. I've not putting anything else in, so it will stay lovely and fresh looking, and it's blending and doing different things. And don't stop it from doing different things. Just let it do whatever it likes, because when you come back with stronger layers over the top, this will all fade into the background. So I'm just going to leave you to play for a minute, and I'm going to get some clean water. So I have clean water for mixing. I've gone through 3 pots already. And then we'll start, and we're going to start a little bit more careful with the good copy than this one. I want you to really feel loose on this one. It's like, you know, stretching before you exercise, just loosening up all of your brush strokes. And I'll get clean water. Now I have to say that abstract and wet in wet and very loose painting is the hardest thing to do. It's not just a question of throwing paint and water on paper. It kind of requires a lot of planning, so you know where you're going to put your colors. Requires some discipline so that you stop before you get a wet, muddy mess, and a little bit of patience so that your colors actually have time to blend and do something interesting. And don't feel frustrated if it takes you a few goes to sort of get it working well. This one I was doing here on this paper, I just played for a long time, putting darker layers and using different brushes and figuring out what I could do with different brushes. It was just a play session, just to investigate things. And again, this is not a good copy here. This is just, what does the paint do? What colors flow nicely into each other? The gold usually flows beautifully into other paint colors, kind of explodes into them. So it's always a good one to put over the top of colors. Even the Azo Yellow tends to explode into other colors sometimes, as long as it's wet enough. And you can see down here, there's a lot of colors pushing other colors around and doing things. On this one I did here, I really liked how the yellow pushed up into the pink in that way. It's very unpredictable. You never know if it's really going to do that, or if it's just going to sit there and not do that this time. So you have to just be happy with what you get.
Caroline, I was wondering why we're not wetting the paper first.
Because if we wet the paper first, we're going to get a big blurred look to everything. Everything will blend into each other, really blurred. That is fine. But what we're trying to do with this one is leave some crisp white edges, have some places where the paint's controlled, and we can wet the paint after we put it on to make it do things. And you can't usually do that. Like usually if you make a wash and you wet it, you get a back run or a bloom. But in this case, it doesn't matter, because what we want to have all over the place is blooms. Like all of these areas here are blooms and back runs, and here, and I'm just aiming to get that. And because I've got them all over the place, it doesn't look like I've made one mistake. Let me do the same thing, but with the paper wet. Now, I'm not saying you don't wet the paper ever. It's just for this one, we're going to have a different look by having it on dry paper, and you're getting a feel for how to do the wet in wet technique more artistically. So I'm going to wet the paper all over for this one, just to show you the different look that you will get. There's nothing wrong with either one. And if you find it easier to go with wet paper, then do, like if you find that helpful. I'm going to do the same procedure again. So the Azo Yellow coming along here for the trees and the reflections. So you can see everything. It's just going to be a very, very soft, and that's fine too. And then I want my rose. I'm going to put my rose in the sky. What I can't do, if the paper's already wet, I can't really come back in and wet my paint at any point. That will cause too much wet to be happening. Prussian Blue. I put Prussian Blue up here. I'm still getting some very lovely effects. Quinacridone Gold. Green. And the trees. Another thing, we can start on wet paper, but it's going to take much, much longer to dry before we put the second layer on.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna have to really, really wait. I just don't feel that this looks, let's back out a little bit. I don't think that this looks as exciting as the one where I have stronger color and more control over where I put it, and whites showing through. It's very soft, and there's nothing wrong with it, but it's just different. That's all. It's just different. And I just think when your paper's dry and you can control everything with wet paint or wet brush, you have more control. See, this started to dry very quickly because I was putting it on dry paper, which meant I could go back in and put other colors. And these bushes here, I could go back in and put those on almost immediately because I wasn't working on wet paper and wet paint. But it's a choice, totally up to you. If you are finding it really difficult to control your paints on dry paper, then do your first layer with wet paper, if that's what you'd like to do. There's nothing wrong with that at all. It's just a different technique, that's all. And I thought it would be fun to learn how to mix paints wet and wet on dry paper using all the things I tell you not to do, like don't go back in with water, don't go back in with wet paint, and it'll behave even better on, this is cotton paper right here, this is just a scrap of cotton paper, so everything's going to behave better on the cotton paper and give you more control. So if I go in with the yellow for the bushes and stuff, I can, what I'm doing is I'm putting them on dry paper, but then I'm getting a wet brush and I'm spreading them out a little bit with a wet brush so that when I put the pink on, I know that it's going to have something to blend into and it will be strong. Like pink going on dry paper is going to be nice and strong. And it gives me a little bit more working time. So now I put the pink on dry, but I can get a wet brush and I can wet the edges of this pink and take and put the blue on. And because the blue is going on dry paper and the pink is on dry paper, everything has more vibrancy. I guess that's it. The colors are more vibrant. The mixes are more unpredictable. And everything is kind of flowing up and flowing down and then getting stopped by the dry paper. So I can leave splashes of white. A little bit of gold. And I can go back in, just get that deep, not deep green, the light green. Make a bit more light green. The Prussian blue. And I can go back in with that light green. And I can let it mix with the yellow and everything. And it's not too wet. Nothing's too wet to reject the color because everything's starting to dry already on the dry paper. Put a bit more light green. And I can get a wet brush. If I want to spread the paint out, I just get a wet brush and just spread it out where I want it to spread. And then you can always use your dry brush to stroke the paint in the direction you want it to go. Like stroking it down into the water really gives it that reflective look. So I'll just put that against this is wet paper and wet paint, and this is dry paper and wet paint. And it's just a difference in vibrancy and look, that's all. So it's your choice, what you feel comfortable with. And all those things like don't put water on it, try putting water on it. See what happens. You'll get some lovely kind of blooms happening. And the thing is, it doesn't really matter how your first layer goes, whether it goes well, soft, vibrant. When you put your second layer over this when it's dry, you're going to start building it into a composition rather than just a sort of wet in wet mess, if you like. Though I definitely wouldn't call anything we make a mess, but it's the second and third layer that's going to make this into something that you recognize as a painting, as a picture. This is sort of your background. Like this is starting to dry now. So you can imagine if we come back with detail, or if it was, nice and dry, getting some dark green. We come back with detail like the branches on the tree, which we can do with a thin brush, the leaves on the tree and that kind of thing, and much more detailed on dry paper, trees and bushes, and extra detail over here on dry paper. It's going to take on the look of a composition rather than just a wet in wet painting. I'm going really fast now. We're going to go really slow when we do this, and we're going to put in a lot of dry detail that's much more controlled. It's not all going to be wet in wet and out of control stuff. I've got ultramarine blue here, and wet brush again to just blend it in. And we're going to have these branches that come down from this tree. Put all different greens on there. We can have light greens on the edge of the branch, darker greens mixed with brown in the shadows, some dark browns in the lake, maybe where the edge of the lake is. And then get your thin brush. I'm not expecting you to do all this now, but this is how we're going to build it up to look more like a composition. So when you've got your leaves in, you can take your thin brush, your thinnest brush that you have, and then put in some of your branches. That you'll have some really sharp detail, and that will make everything look fine. All of your wet in wet will sort of fade into the background. And we'll work on that slowly. All these other parts, they're controlled. They're controlled, and you're slow and you dry between layers. I guess what works for this is the complementary colors is what works for this composition. The yellow, green, the bright green, and the rose, the pinky color, are beautiful complements of each other. So they really make the composition sing with those two colors in it. And then having all of the other dark greens as well gives the whole painting life and depth. And the blues, they just add a little bit of contrast to everything and make sure that you have something to set off your lighter colors. I'm going back with my ultramarine and adding a little bit more ultramarine to this side so that this side won't be too light when the other side is very, very dark. And little things like that, and little things like adding a few little darker trees over this side helps to balance it. And then you can, if the paper's dry, you can maybe pull reflections down from those trees. A little bit of water, a little dry brush, that's a bit too much maybe, but always come over the top with some green. I'm just playing. This is just my one where I'm kind of thinking, where are we going? What are we doing? How's it all going to work? Can I get my brush to dance around a little bit? Like hold your brush. If you want to be loose, hold your brush closer to the end and move it around. Don't hold it like a pen and control it. Hold it closer to the end and just let it dance around back and forth, this way, that way. So your brush strokes are coming from different directions. Vary your green, have 2 or 3 greens mixed up so you can wet in wet, just pop some light greens next to your dark greens. Have some brown mixed with your greens so that your dark areas are nice and dark. Where over on the left here, we can pop in some nice dark leaves. So we've got light, medium, and dark. And it's best to put your branches in when you're finished most of your leaves, sort of coming between them. And then you can always put a few more leaves in if you feel you need them, once you've got a few branches coming from between them. And that's all you really need to make this look like something. In fact, I've gone a little bit straight with my horizon there, and I want to go back to the reference photo. And the reference photo has a sort of a bank here, and there's actually a space between where the darker bank comes over and this far horizon. So that's kind of nice to leave. I realized doing this one that I've gone a bit dark back here. So that's the planning stage. You don't just chuck paint on willy-nilly like I did here. You kind of have a little bit of a plan. so that you have more of a composition. And that's when you can slow down and think about it a little bit more. Anyway, so I'm going to put my play time one to one side. I'm going to get my good cotton paper out, my 140-pound paper. And we'll all take a big deep breath. Make sure you've got nice clean water to work with. And have everything ready. Have all of the brushes you need at the ready. If you've used up quite a bit of your paint, which I have playing around, then mix some fresh paint. And what happens to paint is it evaporates quite quickly. So it's important to go back and put some more water in it so that when you start using it again, it's going to move really easily on your paper. So all of these have evaporated a little bit during that time. So I'm going to get some more pigment, get some more water. This one was my rose and gold. And again, just use what you have. Use what you have. If you don't have Prussian blue, then use phthalo blue mixed with a little bit of ultramarine. If you don't have Azo yellow, use a different bright yellow. Now this is my Prussian blue. I'm just adding water and pigment, so I've got plenty. I can, if I don't, oops, I put ultramarine in that, went in the wrong paint. Oh, Caroline. I will leave that there and get a different one. I'm already running out of space. Prussian. So if you don't have Prussian, mix ultramarine and phthalo blue. And you'll have a dark, coolish blue. So I want lots of Prussian. And then let's have that nice bright green ready. So I need lots of yellow for that bright green. And then a little bit of Prussian, a little bit of a cool blue with it to make it that very acid light green. And I can always mix my dark green here again. This was the Prussian blue, and you can mix it with either yellow or gold, whichever one you like. I'm mixing mine with a little bit of gold, and I'm mixing it with a little bit of burnt sienna as well to darken it up a little bit more. A little bit more pigment. I want it nice and dark, so I'm going to go back, get a bit more pigment. Just remember, if your paint looks insipid and runny, you got to mix a bit more pigment in with it. You got to keep going until your paint looks nice and juicy and dark. I'll make one here. I'll make a nice dark green. Well, I'll just put ultramarine blue here. That'll do for now. So I got lots of color ready to go. I got big brushes. All my water is dirty again. All right, are we ready to go? Are we ready to take a deep breath and see what we can do? And remember, anytime you feel it's too dry, just use a wet brush to wet it up a little bit and move it around. So I'm going in first with my Azo yellow, my bright yellow, and I want that to be along my sort of shoreline. I want it to form sort of shrubbery, indistinct shrubbery up here, out of trees and bushes. They're getting smaller as I think they're going into sort of the distance back here. And there are lots of lily pads on the creek, or the lake that feeds the creek, or the creek that feeds the lake. So you can have the lily pad shapes if you like. And there's also quite a bit of horizontal reflection in the lake. I'm putting all that in. Now I've got to work quickly, because if this dries, I'm not going to get it bleeding into the pink. So I'm going to take my wet brush, and I'm just going to wet the edge of those trees before I go in with the pink, because I want it to bleed in to the yellow. And I'm going in my pink and gold as well. Pink and gold is kind of orangey. Come down into that yellow. Get up a little higher. I also want some pink rose color in the lake or creek or whatever it is. I've never been to this place, so I'm just guessing. Put some in here. Don't worry about leaving some white. It's nice to leave some white space. And so that the blue is going to mix with the pink, I'm going to just wet the edge of the pink a little bit. And before the pink is dry, big brush, I've got my biggish brush, I'm going to come in with the Prussian Blue. That's the one I mix with the ultramarine wrong color. I'm going to have that mixing with the pink. I can go over the top of the pink in places and make a sort of a slightly muddier color, because it will be clouds, and that's okay. I can bring it down to the yellow down here because it'll form a green for the bushes. A little bit of blue cloud across here. And I want to have a little bit of that sky in the water reflected. Now the paper is dry, so I can really control where I put a lot of the color, especially on the left-hand side here. I'm just going to go with a light wash of the Prussian, because I want to come back in later with a lot of dark color. And while all of this is blending, I'm just going to do a little bit of dry brush, just a little bit to help it sort of fuzz through to the next layer, and a little bit here too. And I know I have lots of white paper still. I'm going to fill that up with other colors. It will be fine. This is my very first layer. I have some rose here. I'm kind of thinking I just maybe want to put a bit more rose into the sky here. Just a tiny bit. Maybe here on the creek. Now at this point, I think it's really important for me to just let this all soak in and flow where it wants to flow. And I think I can probably get the light green in without disturbing anything. That really, really light green. Take that along here. Kind of not being too precise with my brush, just forming some sort of tree shapes. I've got my brush on its side actually, forming some sort of tree shapes here. and a little bit of back and forth into the lake. And now I definitely want to stop. I don't want to do any more while it's still wet. It'll be too much. I'm just taking a wet brush just to soften off. Some of these have got hard edges, which is fine. I'm just softening them off with a wet brush. And I think that's another thing about working on the dry paper is you can get a combination of hard and soft edges. So a hard edge is when your brush is on dry paper and you get that hard look to the edge. And a soft edge is like up here where everything looks soft. And it's kind of nice to have that combination of the two. Getting all the extra paint off the edges. Now, when you're working on all of your wet in wet, I'm just going to use the hairdryer to get my first layer dry. And so when you get to a point where you feel that you can't do any more wet in wet because everything's too wet, make sure you dry it. If you have a hairdryer, please dry it, because the more you work on something after it's too wet, the worse it gets. Whereas nice dry layer is going to look lovely. So I won't subject you to the terrible noise. I will mute myself. So when you've got yours completely dry, you're going to need some of the darker colors to work on the dark side of the creek. So you're going to need some ultramarine blue, and for some of your parts here, you're going to need your dark green, mixing a Prussian and either the gold or yellow and some brown. So you have that dark green. You'll need a bit more of the light green, the yellow and the Prussian. And ultramarine blue for some of the details. And then you're going to need a dark brown. So you can mix a dark brown or use a dark brown. I usually mix mine with ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, or ultramarine blue and rose and something else, gold or something. Or you can use sepia, or you can use burnt umber. You can use anything that looks like a dark brown in your palette, whatever you like. And I've got a whole selection of brushes here, so I can use everything from my thin brush to my great big thick brushes, although we're going to be a little bit more in control now. So I would go to about a number 8 brush if I were you, something not quite as big. I'm looking for my 8. That's a pencil. There it is. I'll put that one up there. So we want to kind of build up some of the darks now. And remember, what I forgot when I was just playing was that I want the creek to be sort of right here where I have this blue line, not the creek, well, yeah, I think it's where the creek comes out. I think it's this sort of a shoreline here. And I think this creek is running out into maybe a lake, because it was called Consecon Creek, the photo. So this creek bed here, I'm going to make sure I remind myself that that's going to be about here. I'm just going to give myself a little pencil line. And then the shore back here, I have that space between them, which is what I would like. Then I can work on this whole area, darkening it up with ultramarine, with the dark green, a little bit more of the light green. And also over on this side, excuse me, I don't want it to be too light or it be unbalanced. So I need to put a bit of shading in that side too. Go for water. I'm going to start with my ultramarine blue. and my number 8 brush. And now I want a little bit more control. So I am going to start on this side just to remind myself that I want a little bit more dark coming in over here. So I'm going to bring a little bit more ultramarine over here. And again, I'm working on dry paper, horizontal brush strokes, but I can also blend those brush strokes in with a wet brush. I've got a little bit of water on my brush, not a lot. I've kind of dried it off on my sponge. I've got a sponge here. And I'm just pulling that wet brush along those brush strokes again to soften them up a little bit. And I'm thinking I need a little bit more pink mixing with that ultramarine. So I'm just going to take that rose color on the tip of my brush and add a little bit more where the ultramarine is. I get kind of some lilac colors. And now I'm sort of controlling where the color goes more than just letting it do its own thing. As I come back here a little bit, I want the darker green. So I'm going into my darker green and I'm going to put a little bit of dark green coming in here. And you don't want to lose all of your lovely pinks and your light colors. So this is where you really have to sort of be in control of your brush. And again, I'm going to wet my brush and just ease those brush strokes in so that they're not too hard edged, but they will stay where you put them because the paper is dry. Wet my brush, ease those colors in just with a wet brush. And again, you don't have to wet them everywhere, just here and there, just gives them that watercolor look. Point of your wet brush just here and there, just a little bit of dark. You especially want to make sure that your edges, you go right to the edge. What you don't want is like little white dots at the edge. You want to go right over to the edge. I'm going a little bit of the dark green, and then I want to go into my light green, a little bit more light green. It will look pretty over the pink. And I can have a little bit, I've got the light green to here too. And a wet brush, just ease it in. So you're going slowly, you're building a second layer, but with way more control than your first layer. You want to keep the background quite light, because we're going to put, eventually we're going to put sort of a dark border of the trees here. So we'll work on that, come closer to the end of the painting. So now I've got a little bit more color over on the right hand side. I think I want a little bit more in the middle too. I've got my reference photo right in front of me, so I can see where the dark ripples in the lake come across, and they do come across here. Try and keep your lines nice and horizontal. And put on your dry paint, and then every so often get your tip of your brush wet and just gently ease those brush strokes in with your wet brush. Now I'm going to go to my dark green. And I want to do some negative painting. See these yellow parts? They're going to be like lily pads. And as I come across with my dark green, I'm going to leave little dry patches of lily pads showing, or little dry patches of reflections. Not so much on this side because it's in shade. So wherever I have this light yellow, I can go around it in spots. And again, anytime you feel it's all getting a little bit too dark or too hard edged, you can take your wet brush, and I've switched now to my ultramarine mix for the corner. I want the corner to be quite dark. I still want to have some little bits of pink showing through, so I'm not going to paint around them. And this is one part you can't do wet on wet. You can't have this control for negative painting and precisely putting your paint where you want it if your paper's wet. You could definitely do things like I could wet a streak like this with my brush. That's just plain water. And when I come above that streak with the green, it will all flood down into that area that I've just wet, giving a really interesting, attractive look. So you can definitely do things like that, like just wet one streak of the painting to get a different look, get that kind of watery look. And then all this dark blue I put on is bleeding down into that wet streak that I made. And I have to make sure that I remember that this area is where I wanted the creek to come out. So I'm going to add some burnt sienna to my blue because I want it to look like the edge of the creek is kind of like muddy. And this is burnt sienna with my ultramarine blue, and I'm putting that in so it's a much darker brownish color. So burnt sienna is a great one for making anything darker and more brown. And I'm going to bring that sort of creek bed out here a little bit. And now I have that dark brown on my brush. I'm going to add it in here and in here a little bit. Add it in other places so that I have that color reflected somewhere else, especially corners. And right under that dark brown that I just put on there, I'm going to put a little bit more light green coming back and forth here. And particularly back here where I've got that space I've left, a bit more of that really light green color. And put a few more light greens in. Now, hopefully where I put that light green under the brown, I'll get some bleeding happening because I want the brown to bleed down into the green to give a reflective look. I can even, if the brown is still wet, because that Azo Yellow will bleed into other colors, I can put a strong mix over the top of that dark mix and have it bleed up into it. And usually, like I said, this would be a no-no. This would be a no-no putting wet paint over the top of wet paint. You'd say you don't want it you'd get a back run. What I'm trying to do is get a back run. I want a back run there. And this is too light. I have some Prussian and ultramarine mix here. And I want to take that in darker still. Wet brush, clean wet brush. I'm just pulling that out a little bit. I'm getting a lighter, I have over here a lighter ultramarine mix, which means I got a little bit more water with it. So that in some places I can have just a more ultramarine look rather than a dark blue. Kind of in here. And a little bit here. I'm getting quite a bit of depth of color now, and this wouldn't work unless my first layer was dry. I wouldn't be able to get this to work. Now in my reference photo, it's quite light back here, but there's a little bit of green just here, and I want to sort of just darken up the green that's, I've got my dark green here. I'm going to put a little bit of yellow with it. Just here, I've got the dark green that's all flooded down here, and then I want a kind of a medium green. I don't want it quite that dark for this area just back here, where there's sort of a bit of a streak of darker green coming along here. Every time you put a darker color on, it makes your light colors look lighter. I know that sounds odd, but it does. I'm just putting a little bit more of that green on here and there. And I have to be careful not to overdo it. And this is very different to my other one. They never turn out the same when you're doing this kind of wet in wet thing. Now I have that sort of straight line under this kind of bank here, but I need something else here too. I can't just have a straight bank. I have to have something on top of the bank. And in the photograph, it's sort of bushes and shrubbery and anything like that. So it can be pretty loose kind of bushes and shrubbery. I'm going to put on the yellow so that when I put the dark green into it, I get a little bit of bleeding into the, well, I'm not going to put the dark green, actually, I'm going to put the medium green onto that yellow I just put on there. So I put some yellow on, then some medium green, and then I'm going to get a smaller brush, my number 4, and the darker green. And at the bottom here, I'm going to add the darker green, coming out to the edge of that sort of piece of land, I guess, that's just coming out here. I've now got the brown color, adding a bit of that at the bottom. And even some reflections. Each green's going to bleed into another green and just all kind of blend together. I have an interesting brush too. I don't use it hardly ever, but I went down to the art store a few weeks ago and I found this little brush called a filbert grainer, just a little one. And it's all sort of distressed at the end. All the little bristles are sort of clipped out. And what it's for is for making like grassy areas. See, if I put, let me zoom right in. Let's see what I'm doing. If I put this funny little brush with all these weird little bristles into that wet paint there, I can gently pull it up like that. And I can make sort of a grassy, oh, probably better focus again. I can make a kind of a grassy edge to whatever that greenery is supposed to be there. Just very delicate sort of little edge. And again, when you have brushes like that, these fun little brushes, it's really important not to overdo it with them. Let's bring my sketchbook down here and some green paint. So this, if I fill this paint with green paint, fill this brush with green paint, I can get that kind of grassy look with it. But if you overdo these brushes, if you do your whole foreground with these sorts of brush strokes from this brush, it can look very repetitive. So it's nicer if you had your foreground of green grass, like your nice bright green with some of your dark green. Sort of wet in wet. And then you took this brush from your wet in wet paint and you just pulled up a few, like a few grass strokes here and there, or even when this was dry, you can pull up a few, and then it looks more natural rather than having them all very regular and everything detailed. It's a fun little brush for those, just those little touches. Little touches of sort of bulrushes or grass or anything like that. I even did a few in the foreground of mine, I think just to play with my brush. I sort of did just a few here on the finished painting. So it gives some kind of a foreground look to it. And again, I'm going right, then up, then left. I'm not going up and down. I'm sort of moving my brush around a bit. Just to be sort of playful. I must remember to use it more often because it's a fun little brush. Let's zoom out again and see what I'm doing. Right, so all of my foreground, and I did one that's a little bit too big there, all my foreground's pretty wet now. So it's a good time to work somewhere else on the painting and let that dry. So what we would like to do, I think, is come along this sort of horizon line and just put some depth. What I'm trying to emulate is the shadows between these trees here. And I haven't wanted to do them really precisely. I could do them all negative painting really precisely, but I don't think that's going to suit the whole style of the painting. It's going to stand out too much as detailed negative painting. So a better thing to do is to just gently wet along that horizon line, just very gently, not too much water, so that you're going to get a little bit of bleeding with the dark green paint. And if you wet it too much, you can always like dab it up a little bit so it's just slightly damp. And then with a very small brush, my number 2 brush, I'm going to get that really dark green. That's the dark green that I mixed with the Prussian Blue, the burnt sienna, and the Quinacridone Gold. So it's a nice deep green. And I'm going to test it. Before I go too far along there, I'm going to test it. I'm going to just pull my brush along here and see how much bleeding I get. And I think it's just about right. So what I want it to do is I want it to bleed up higher in some of the trees. So I get this effect of one side of the tree being in shadow, but I don't want it to be super detailed. So a little brush is important for that. And you don't have to go along in one big line. You can do a little bit at a time and see if it's going to bleed up between the trees. And if it isn't going to bleed up between the trees, wet your brush, get a wet brush, and just kind of agitate the side of your paint and encourage it to bleed up a little bit. What this does is I do need a little bit more water. It encourages a kind of a horizon line to your painting, which is kind of important, even in an abstract, have some sense. that there's a horizon there. I'm just gently going along, and here and there, I'm just forcing it to bleed up a little bit where I think it would be a good place to outline one of those trees. Take it along here. And like I said, if it doesn't do it, wet your brush and just ease the paint up there. And the other thing you can do is you can make it reflect as well. You can just wet underneath it a little bit and just ease it down into the wet underneath. Just a little bit of wet. And where you've got a shadow, just ease it into the wet paint underneath. Remember, things in the background shouldn't be very detailed or strong. I've just got a little bit of ultramarine blue. I just wanted to add a little bit more dull color to the edge there, so it's not too distracting. I'm pushing everything into the background. I got the ultramarine blue again, just adding a little bit more dark back there. If you can't get yours to work, don't worry, just keep practicing the wetting and the bleeding and see if you can figure it out. And I've got a little bit of ultramarine blue, and I'm just looking at my reference picture and just trying to put in a few more of those kind of blue areas. Everything that you put on should be pretty transparent. The paint is transparent. You should be seeing your other colors right through them. What I want to do is I want to check on the reference photo how far over does this tree come. So the total width of this is 14 centimeters across here. And this tree, the furthest point of this tree is 5.5 centimeters. So we got a little bit of like rounding down and rounding up to do to sort of make it easy to work with. We can round this up to 15 centimeters and round this down to 5 centimeters and say it is roughly a third, roughly, which is great because that is perfect proportions. If we were just to, when we did our paper, this is what I usually do when I'm working from a reference photo. I say, okay, it'd be way better if this was 15 centimeters. So I'm just going to extend my paper a centimeter this way to make the perfect thirds. And if this is also 1/3 here and this is 2/3, that puts this tree in the absolute golden section of the painting, where it's perfect for a composition. So let's just see how close it comes. So this is 10.3 this way, and where this bank is 6.8. So it's, you know, it's coming very, very close to being in that really good area. So we can look at our piece of paper. So my piece of paper that's showing here is almost 20 centimeters. It's 19 point something. I'm just rounding it up to 20. if I say 21, it makes the math easier because 3 goes into 21 really easily. And I can say my tree should come not quite 7, but maybe just past 6. I'm not going to put a lot of pencil line. I'm just going to kind of mark that I don't want my tree to come much past there, about a third of the way out. And again, I think this is pretty okay where I've got this little island. So I want to make sure that if I'm putting the leaves and stuff on, I don't want to pass this pencil mark. Some of them are going to be up here. They're not going to be, if you look at this tree, it's here and then it kind of does this. Look at the outside shape. And it has a big piece of sky showing in here. And then it kind of curves back in. There's a big mass down here. We're not going to make it as quite a bigger mass. And the corner is nicely blocked with a mass. And then this big branch comes almost right down to the land that comes out here. So we want to kind of look at this shape that comes out. I wouldn't normally draw on my paper, but this is actually a aqua sketch pencil. It dissolves in water, so it should be okay. And I want my tree mass to kind of come out there, and I can draw my main branches in. We have a big branch that comes out kind of here, and off of that branch there's a big branch that comes down here and then splits into 2 here, and then splits off again into more branches. And then there's one that comes in here. So if I have a little bit of branch work and a little bit of math to help me get everything positioned just right, then I can start going in with the leaves. And put my ruler where I'm not going to lose it a second time. Now we need 3 greens ready to go. And I'm kind of need to remix them. We need the nice bright green with the Azo Yellow and the Prussian Blue. Nice and light for the light sunlit sides of the tree. And you need to make it lighter than it looks on the picture. You'd be surprised by the time you get it on over your Prussian blue sky and you've got your other greens bleeding into it. It needs to be a lot lighter than it looks in the picture. I'm going to add a little bit more yellow to mine. Then we need a lovely dark green with the Prussian blue and either Quin Gold or bright yellow. I'm going to use my bright yellow this time, and some burnt sienna to get it nice and dark. Get that green lovely and dark, a bit more Prussian blue. And then I want a medium green. So I'm going to mix that one with Ultramarine Blue and a bright yellow like Azo Yellow, and get myself a medium green. And I want this dark one even darker. You'd be surprised how light it looks once you put it on the paper. I will go in with the Quin Gold this time, and the burnt sienna, and a bit more Prussian. Yeah, and I've got a nice dark green. So I've got 3 greens: medium green, dark green, and a light green. And I'm going to use my number 4 brush for now. You kind of want to use the tip of your brush to make the edges of the leaves on this tree. I haven't even really looked at this tree to see what it is. Not sure what kind of a tree it is at all. So we'll make one up. It's an abstract. So I'm using the point of my brush to make those leaf shapes. This is my lightest green that I'm going in with. And I'm remembering that the furthest part of the tree just comes out to here. And I'll start with all the light branches. And we're going to let them blend wet in wet, but we definitely don't have to worry about them drying too fast or anything. I'm just dipping in my medium green and just alongside some of those light green ones. And I'm not worried if they're not wet enough to blend, or I'm not worried if they do blend. It's fine at this point. Some can blend and some can just be on dry. And I'm starting to fill in with the medium green. All these branches that stick further out are a little bit lighter, but it's quite cloudy in this picture. So obviously there's not a lot of sun, so they're not really sunlit. But what I do have right in front of me all the time is the actual photograph, so that I'm not going too far off of what I want it to look. I want it to look like branches. I'm not that abstract that I just don't want anyone to know what it is. I think this is what makes a wet in wet painting lovely, is when you have a lot of abstract, but you also have some composition that you can figure out what's happening. I'm looking at where the branches are going to be and where the biggest mass of leaves is. It's kind of interesting. I'm really not sure what kind of a tree it is. So I'm mostly in the medium greens, because I will go to the dark greens at the very last. I can also add right in the middle here of the kind of massive tree, I'm going to add some light, so the edges will be light, and then I can hit it with the dark. Now I'm kind of dipping anywhere, not even concentrating. Now I feel like I've got enough little leaves in. Now I'm going to switch to, I think I'm going to switch to my number 8 brush, so that I start to get a bigger mass of leaves in. And I'm going to the medium green to start with. I still want to see a little bit of sky, because your sky can get obliterated quite quickly, and you do want to have some sky. There's a big piece of sky in the middle here where the branches come through, so don't forget to leave that. And with this bigger brush, I can now be even looser. I'm twisting it this way and that way, so my leaves go here and there, all over the place. Now I'm going into my very, very dark green. And this is where I'm going to, over here, I want to fill up a bit more of the sky over here. There's not much showing. Make sure you can see the corner. And then we want some sky showing. And what we'll do very soon is stop and put the branches in, and then you can go back and maybe add a few more leaves here and there if your leaves and branches don't sort of match up. Now I want to put a few more leaves in once I get the branches in, but right now, when I get to this point, I want the branches to help me find my way a little bit more. So I'm going to switch to my very fine 2/0 script liner brush. And I want some nice dark brown for the branches. You've got loads of choices for that. You can mix one. I can mix my ultramarine here with some burnt sienna. It'll get me a lovely dark brown. Especially if I add a little bit of Prussian blue, it'll be even darker. So that's one choice. Or I have a sepia. So sepia is not that strong. So I can use the sepia, but I can mix it with a little bit of Prussian blue or ultramarine just to get it darker. I can use a Payne's gray. There's a Payne's gray. And I can add a little bit of sepia to that or burnt sienna. So many different choices to mix a brown. As long as you've got a brown and a blue or a brown and a gray, you've got lots of different colors that will make brown, as you've probably learned from the triads. Just get something, if you just get a dark brown out of your palette, that's great. I'm going to get my little brush, and then I want to put in the little branches. There's some little branches coming from here. Remember to make that kind of a Y shape. And I'll show you on another piece of paper what I mean by that. So here's put that down there. Here's the branch coming down. And then this is what I call it's an upside down Y shape. If you turn it up this way, it's a Y. So what you want to do is keep making those Ys continually. This is going to become another one here, and this will become another one here, and you can have another one coming off of that, and they get thinner as each one breaks off. It becomes thinner, but that's how you form the branches. It's continually, you start with the base of the Y, and then you split off. Wiggle your brush, important to wiggle your brush, and then you split off again into another one, and then another one. And some of them can have a broken branch on, that's fine. But that is how you form your branches. Wiggle your brush so that they're not perfectly straight. And I'm going to have one just, and again, they go behind the leaves that you've made. So every so often, you see your branch poking through, and then it disappears behind your leaves. Now I have a thicker script liner. It's a number 2 script liner. It's just a little bit thicker. Now there's a much thicker branch in the middle here, so I want to use my thicker brush. Now you can just use an ordinary number 2 brush if that's all you've got. I just find these script liners are much better for doing thin lines like this. So this is one of the branches, and then there's another one that comes off of it. They kind of dangle down over the water here. And I should actually switch back to my other brush for the ends of these branches, because they get thinner. So I've got the thicker branches in, and I want to switch back to my thin script liner to put some of the thinner ones. As it comes right down here, kind of, there's some thin shapes. And if you have some leaves like I do that don't look like the original, you just invent some branches that match up to your leaves that you've made. And don't get too carried away. We don't have to have every branch in there. We just need to make it look reasonably like a tree that's hanging over the water. Might be a willow. I'm looking at the leaves and thinking they don't look really willowish, but the fact that it's all hanging over the creek here kind of suggests it might be some kind of willow. If anyone out there knows what kind of tree this is, you can let me know. I find at this point it's very easy to get carried away with putting way too many branches in. So I think I'm going to tell myself stop and add a few more leaves here and there to just connect some of those. And when I have my little brush too, I can also add a little bit of detail to the bottom of this area where it's, I've got my brown and my little brush and where the water's coming out of the creek here. I can add a bit more dark over the top, giving a lot more depth to the painting. I'll grab my number 4 brush and a bit more of the dark green. And I'm just going to put in a little bit more greenery around my branches now that I have them. If you put them in first, they're too over the top of everything and not natural looking. It helps to kind of put them in halfway through and then just finish up the ends of them. And again, don't get too precise. Remember, this is supposed to look a little bit abstract. There is a really big mass of tree in the photo here, so I don't want to have too much background showing over here. Onto my number 2 brush now. I want to just do the final kind of details of these leaves so that when the brain sees little details, it takes that shape and it applies it to everything of that color in that area and fills it in. So you don't have to do every leaf. If you give enough information to the viewer with a few shapes, their brains will fill all of the rest in, no problem. You don't have to do the work. So down near the bottom here, at the end of these branches, I'm just putting a few leaves in that are the shape that I see. And what I will probably do when they're dry is I might add a bit more just shadow to some areas where there's like big areas of dark green. I'll show you what I mean. I'll get a bigger brush. And I see a big area of shadow here, and I might just take a big brush and just add a bit more depth in there. I might take I'm going to take some burnt sienna just by itself and just add a bit of burnt sienna up here for some warmer shadows up here and in here. And again, it's so easy to overdo things like that. You have to just do a little bit and then pull back and see what it looks like. I'm adding a little bit of ultramarine blue to my green, just so it's more blue. Maybe just putting a little bit more blue, that blue green here. And same with my water. Just thinking, do I need a little bit more? Do I need a little bit more depth just in here? That blue, I've got ultramarine blue mixed with that dark green. I'll bring my palette over. I just took a bit of ultramarine blue and I mixed it with that dark green. Got quite a big loose brush here. I'm just wondering if I need a little bit more dark over here to make it dramatic, especially in the corner. And then of course, if I've got all that dark over there, I got to remember to balance it a little bit. And maybe I want to have a little bit of dark over here. I've got that same color on my brush. Take another brush and just wet that so that it's loose. You don't need much. You don't need much to balance it, but you need a little bit to balance it. So I'm bringing that dark green that has the ultramarine blue in. Just here and there. Bit of water on my brush. I'm just going to ease that in with a little bit of water. Because I know that I've got to have a little bit of that dark over on the right to make sure that the painting looks right. And if I look at the photo, there are some quite dark shadows here, over here as well, under the lily pad. So that's just sort of what I'm trying to loosely suggest here and there. And again, you don't need a lot. It doesn't have to be the same mass that you have over here. You just need to have that little bit of balance, that little bit of dark on the other side. And again, that tree back here, right on the edge. I want to just give it a little bit more dark, and I'm going to use a wet brush to, then my dry brush, I use my dry brush to pull it down into the lake, just like that, just to give a touch to those trees over on the right. Sometimes these finishing touches are good to do the next day when you have a little break from looking at it and you come back and you give it a second look and you kind of decide, is there anything else that it needs to finish it off? I think I've got that light spot between the two banks there, but I kind of feel like I want a little bit more of some dark edge here to push it a bit more into the background so that I have my very thin brush here. And if you look at the photo, there is quite a line right there. I'm wiggling my brush. Maybe I'm looking at my branches and thinking, oh, maybe I just need a couple more branches to finish that side. So little finishing touches. Often you need to go to step back and have a look and let it dry. It looks so different when it's dry. Well, my camera doesn't want to pull back. Oh, that's because I've got it like this. When I'll take it up a little bit. There we go. So this is like, and they're different. My first one is different to my second one. If you're doing wet in wet, it's never going to turn out the same, which is kind of nice. And I think everything looks better in the morning afterwards when you have another look at it tomorrow. Well, I hope you had fun letting your paint run all over the paper and paint wet in wet. It's kind of hard to do an abstract, and even harder to be loose with watercolor, but I think it looks beautiful when it goes right. So try it again if it didn't go great the first time, and just keep practicing, and I'll see you again next week. Thanks for joining me. Bye for now.